This is Akashvani. In the program Money Talk, now we bring you a discussion on improving macroeconomic environment, easing inflation and rising industrial output. The participants are Dr. S.B. Sharma, economic analyst, and Anubha Rohadge, anchor.
Official data released earlier this week gives indication of an improving macroeconomic environment in India, wherein retail inflation has eased further and industrial production is up. To discuss the implications of these figures and the impact on Indian economy, we have with us economic analyst S.P. Sharma. Mr. Sharma, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Mr. Sharma, we've been getting good news on the economic front for a while now. The latest being that for the month of May, the CPI-based inflation or retail inflation has eased to 4.25%, which is a 25-month low. What are the factors that have influenced the continuing decline in inflation in the last few months?
Yes, I would like to mention that inflation trajectory was very high during the months of April, May, June, July of the last year, 2022. But with the efforts of the government, like the reforms in the supply side and calibrated steps undertaken by Reserve Bank of India, now inflation trajectory is very much near the lower band of tolerance level of Reserve Bank of India, that is 4 to 6%. So now the inflation is 4.25%, which is, I think, benign for the Indian economy, as most of the economies, majorly the advanced economies and emerging and developing economies, are still facing a high trajectory of the inflation scenario. But in India, with the effective measures, with the support of the government, like various measures, cutting the excise duties and supply side reforms, easing the reforms for the food production sector, and then the supply chains, connecting with the global supply chains. So all these reforms supported the trajectory of inflation, and its supply is now becoming easier. And on the demand side, RBI increased the repo rate to address rising demand, so that people are in a liquidity trap, so that they are not able to spend more in the market with the high interest rates. So all these factors impacted the inflation trajectory from the demand side and supply side scenario. And moreover, the other banks, like the synchronized move of the central banks, also supported the inflation trajectory as international prices started correction in the months of July, August, September, October. So now the WPI inflation is also less than 1%, which is supporting the CPI scenario, as wholesale prices are decelerating. So that's why the retail prices are also in tandem and in line with the WPI inflation. So overall, India is successful in curbing the inflation as compared with many advanced, emerging and developing economies, as our effectiveness of the policy rates, like repo rate, we increased the repo rate by 310 basis points, and inflation trajectory has come down significantly. So monetary policy has proven very effective in India, along with the supply side reforms undertaken by the government.
Like you said, inflation continues to decline. In fact, it is the third month when it is below the 6% upper threshold set by RBI. Do you think this trend will continue in the coming months?
Yes, I am very much optimistic about the inflation trajectory. I think it will come down sub 4% in the coming months, because now the prices of commodities which stoke the inflation are coming down. Majorly the food items. Deceleration in food items is supporting the lower trajectory of inflation. As I said, that WPI is also very much below 1%. So all these factors will support the inflation trajectory, and inflation will remain benign and come below 4% in the coming months.
However, Mr. Sharma, there are some concerns that inflation may pick up again in the coming months, because the base effect is going to fade, the monsoon has been delayed, and also if food prices rise again due to the effect of, or rather due to the threat of El Nino phenomenon and the volatility in the international crude prices. So there are some concerns that, if not immediately, but in the coming months, we may see inflation picking up again. What is your take on that?
My take is that the base effect will not be diminishing. The base effect will remain for many months. You can say till December, base effect will be very, very effective, and YOY growth will not be that much high. I think inflation trajectory will be stable at around 4%, though we are looking at sub 4% CPI inflation in the coming months, but the average would be 4% in the coming months on the basis of high base effect and the correction in raw materials and the international commodity prices. So all these factors will support the inflation trajectory, and that is expected to stabilize at around 4% for a few months in the coming time.
The food inflation, of course, is one of the big significant factors that has contributed to the inflation declining further. But within that food inflation also, there is some concern because the cereal inflation and milk inflation continues to be very high. Now, the recent announcement, in fact, the latest announcement by the government to offload 15 lakh tons of wheat and to set a limit on the stocks of wheat, how significant is a step to, further control and moderate food inflation?
Yes, very true that food inflation always took the overall inflation trajectory, but reforms are continuing in the food processing sector, and the government is very keen to ease the supply side in the milk and related products. So in this scenario, the base effect will work because now the food inflation was increasing again and again during the last year in 2022. So now the base is high. So if the prices remain intact at this level, then in that case also food inflation will not be that much high because of the high base effect. So I don't see that food inflation will be a challenge in times for the overall inflation trajectory. The inflation will remain benign for the next many months.
Coming to the industrial output figures for the month of April, it rose to 4.2% on an annual basis, which is a significant increase from the 1.7% in March. In fact, if you look at sector-wise, increased manufacturing sector's output, which accounts for more than 3/4 of the IIP, grew 4.9% and mining output rose by 5.1%. What do these numbers tell us about the health of our economy?
Yes, because now the government has undertaken a lot of reforms during the last 3-4 years. And the reforms were majorly for the support of manufacturing sector, which is not contributing significantly in the overall GDP trajectory. So government took measures for the ease of doing business, ease of compliances, and decriminalization of the various compliances which impact the businesses. So all these reforms are now very much visible at the ground level, and sentiments for production are increasing. Now as the demand is also happening in the economy and inflation trajectory is coming down and there is no threat of inflation that it will go high. So now the demand will happen that will support the factory production and production possibility frontiers in the factories, and they will be able to deploy more workforce and they will be expanding their capacities also. So all these factors will support the IIP as demand is happening and our exports. Though global demand is not that much intact, but our exports will perform better as compared with many economies. So the estimates are that our exports will grow at around 7-8% in the current financial year also. So all these factors will support the IIP numbers because the support from the government and the reform side and the demand side, all these factors are intact and the IIP growth is expected to remain intact. I don't see that this will be significantly high, more than 10%, but I am looking at genuine growth in the IIP, which is at around 7-8% on an average in a particular financial year. So this year is expected to post a 7-8% IIP growth on the back of reforms, exports, and particularly the schemes which government has announced during the last 2-3 years, particularly the PLI scheme, which is very, very supportive for the manufacturing sector, and the scheme is now becoming more lucrative and people are more and more keen on the PLI, which is a great benefit to the producers.
If we look at segment-wise data, particularly, talking about the consumer durables segment, it hasn't done so well. It contracted by 3.5%. In fact, it has been decreasing or it has been contracting since December 2022, which suggests that demand has remained under pressure. On the other hand, the consumer non-durable goods segment surged by 10.7%. What are the reasons to these opposing figures?
Yes, because the year 2021 was a problematic year and there were new lows in the trajectory of various economic indicators. And in 21-22 again there was a high trajectory on the basis of the low base effect. Again in 22-23 there was low, some numbers were posting low. So the year 2021 created a great volatility in the economic indicator which still is not adjusted. I think sometimes volatility remains because of the high and low base effect. So all these numbers will settle in the coming years. So I think there is no worry from the demand side in the consumer durables, but the data is showing low only because of the statistical impact.
Right. Moving on, cooling inflation and rising production. Now, these figures, when read together with other positive macroeconomic indicators such as rising FII inflows, record GST collection and others, do you believe that RBI will extend its stance of a pause in repo rate hike in its next meeting in August, if not for the rest of the fiscal?
I think RBI will be in a wait and watch trajectory because the inflation, though coming down in India, but still remains high in many economies which are major production economies, manufacturing economies like Germany and other countries like the US. Still inflation is high. So I think RBI will be in a wait and watch trajectory, and if the inflation stabilizes at around 4% for the 3-4 months, then RBI can look at to repo rate to reduce it in a small baby steps, like some 25 basis point reduction in the repo rate to boost up the sentiments of the producers so that demand trajectory remains strong. So I think that will happen by end of this calendar year, by October, November, or even December. But during the coming months, I think there is no such expectation that RBI is going to cut the repo rate because the inflation is still a challenge globally, though we have controlled it significantly in India.
Like you said, the various steps taken by RBI have resulted in controlling and moderating inflation, in fact, bringing it down to a significant level. Do you think RBI is in a good place so far as controlling inflation is concerned? Or what are the steps that the RBI still needs to take to bring down inflation even more?
I think RBI must be very, very cautious about the global developments. If something is happening in the global arena, like inflation is again escalating in some country, which is very much in the trade trajectory with India, like the bilateral trade relations are high with that particular country. So we have to then take some cautious measures to control the inflation so that it is not going up or escalating in the coming times. And more importantly, the supply side reforms should remain intact. That is important as compared with the RBI measures because RBI has controlled the inflation. Now we have to support this inflation trajectory at the lower level with the easier supply side reforms, such as curbing the pudding in the system. If sometimes there is some natural calamity or sometimes the monsoon behavior is not that much benign and monsoons are erratic. So with the lesser production of some particular commodity, there are hoarders in the market. They hoard the commodity and artificially increase the price. So that has to be controlled, and there must be a great check on the such kind of developments. So supply side is more important as compared with the RBI actions because now the effectiveness of monetary policy has proven strong. They have bring down the inflation near the target band, but now we have to support this inflation at the lower level with the easier supply side reforms.
Last question, Mr. Sharma. The figures that we have got in the last few days, also the one figure that has come out is that we've got a better than expected 7.2% growth in GDP for the fiscal 2022 and 23. So moving forward, how optimistic are you about the overall growth of Indian economy?
Yes, I am very optimistic because now Indian economy is becoming more and more strong and its growth trajectory is also high. And the growth is more than expectations. Many people, many organizations and many forecasting agencies were expecting that growth will remain at around 6.8% of 6.9%. But with the support of the government and with the support of the reforms undertaken by the government, growth trajectory has surpassed the expectations of 6.8 or 6.9%. So now the growth is at 7.2% for the last financial year, that is 22-23. So going forward, as projected by the International Monetary Fund, that India is a bright spot in the global ecosystem. The growth will remain high and always, as Indian economy is lucrative in the global ecosystem. So according to the IMF projections also, growth will be more than 7% if we calculate the growth from 2021 to 2025. The growth is more than 70% as projected by the IMF. So going forward, I think the reforms will now becoming visible in the coming times, and our growth will be more strong as compared with the last many years, because this will reflect the reforms undertaken by the government during the last many years, and also the global integratedness of the Indian economy as we are becoming more and more prominent in the global ecosystem with the support of the exports, and our exports were all-time high during the last financial year, and this year also expectations are high on the exports front. So the growth trajectory will remain strong not only for the quarters but for the years in the coming times, and India will be a bright spot as mentioned by IMF, and our resilience, particularly the resilience of the macroeconomic indicators supported by reforms, will be more and more robust in the coming time.
Thank you so much for speaking with us, Mr. Sharma.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on improving macroeconomic environment, easing inflation and rising industrial output. The participants were Dr. S.P. Sharma, economic analyst, and Anubha Rohadge, anchor. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of Akashvani. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on AIR Official.